This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony, air quotes nippy, Ames.
And this is A Little Bit Culty, a podcast about what happens when things that seem like a great thing at first go bad.
Every week, we chat with survivors, experts, and whistleblowers for real cult stories told directly by the people who lived through them.
Because we want you to learn a few things we've had to learn the hard way.
Like, if you think you're too smart to get sucked into something culty, you're already prime recruitment material.
You might even already be in a cult.
Oops. You better keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Season 6 of A Little Bit Culty. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to this week's very special episode of A Little Bit Culty.
If you listen to A Little Bit Culty, you're clearly interested in a podcast that covers cults, manipulators, and protecting yourself from systems of control, which means you might already be a big fan of our guest today.
Rachel Bernstein is the host of the Indispensable Indoctrination podcast, and every week on that show, she sits down with former cult members, intervention experts, and people who've left narcissistic and controlling relationships of all kinds to hear their stories and discuss their past experiences. So, of course, we are podcasting buddies.
Is this technically a crossover episode?
It's definitely a culty indoctrination power hour.
So what do you call that? Cross-training? Cross-potting? Carry on. For 30 years, Rachel Bernstein, LMFT, that's licensed marriage and family therapist in case you don't know, has helped former cult members and people with loved ones in cults and highly manipulative relationships. She also provides individual counseling, family counseling, and when possible, group therapy for former cult members. And she also helps families who are trying to reach out to their loved ones who are still in.
That's what we want to talk to her about today. How to help someone you love who's caught up in something. We get emails and messages from people every day who are looking for guidance on this topic. What to do when someone you love is in a cult. So we called in an expert. This is going to be part of our resource series because Rachel is not actually a former cult member. She's an expert. Here's our chat with Rachel Bernstein of the mighty, helpful, and always bingeable Indoctrination podcast. Rachel Bernstein, welcome to Little Bit Culty.
Eager beaver over here.
I got excited.
Yeah.
This has been in the works for a year at least.
Yes, I know, at least. It's really nice to be back talking with you, and I can't wait to get into our discussion.
Us as well. This is something that people have requested time and time again, and it's been woven with different experts, this topic of family members and cults, but we haven't done a dedicated episode. And we feel like you are the expert.
It's an overdue episode.
Overdue. So apologizing to our listenership, it took this long, but better late than never. So we've been on your podcast. This is your first time on ours. For anything in particular you want our listeners to know about how you got into this wacky little space we're in?
Right? Yeah, it can feel sometimes even wackier than wacky, but
And it's not so little either.
Yeah.
And it's not so little. It had been, when I started, it was definitely little. It was definitely niche, like niche within a niche. And so, or niche, as they say out here in LA.
Yeah.
But it is a very interesting subject to me, I think, because it's always going to be timely. There are always new groups. I hear about new groups every day. And now with the internet, there's so much more reach for people and ways people can kind of formulate themselves and look really good on camera and present themselves in a very slick way. They're doing, unfortunately, very well at recruiting new people truly every day. So how I got involved was I had a family member who suddenly got sucked into Scientology. And this was in the 70s, we didn't know anything about cults. And the only books you could find that had anything to do with cults were often written by the leaders, like L. Ron Hubbard's book, which is not going to really help you know about the dangers of his group. You only hear about how it's perfect and the only way that you can, get help. So once we started seeing, and as I was sort of growing up with this visual around me, seeing a family member who was leaving us without leaving us, like she just wasn't there anymore, and she didn't feel present. The look in her eye was different, and suddenly there was a lot of secrecy, and she was missing for periods of time. I thought, what is this? What is this that could be out there that is just wanting to prey on people and wanting to take them away from their lives? And, our family life was okay. It's not like she was needing an escape per se, but they convinced her that our family was dangerous to her and she needed to escape and she needed to go to safety. And for Scientology to call themselves a place of safety is the ultimate irony. But still, when I started in college, in Boston, I remember having already learned about some cult groups and the front names that they used on college campuses. And I know some of the adults will talk to kids about things and you think they're being kind of overly dramatic and maybe trying to make you scared. But there they were. There they were in the student union. There they were with their tables and their brochures and buses taking people away. And I thought, oh, this is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is a real thing that you can help your child get to this place of going to college or wherever your child is away from home. And there are people there waiting to just steal them, truly steal them away from you without their knowledge or consent, without your knowledge or consent. And so then when I went on to be a therapist right after graduating, coming back to LA, going to USC, I saw also cults on that campus, but I also noticed that one of the teachers I had at USC, who was running a support group class, sort of how to run a therapy group, how to run a support group, was running it like a cult.
Mm.
And it was fascinating to watch. It was a case study in favoritism. If you shared more, if you opened up about trauma you had been through, if you admitted your trauma, even if you really didn't have trauma, a lot of people started making up stories. You would then be able to sit closer to the teacher. You would then be liked by her. You would have she'd put her arm around you and invite you out for coffee after. Like there was this whole hierarchy and people really being told that if they didn't share their trauma, that they were withholding, that they were not honoring the people there with their information, like so much pressure. And so I did a little study because I thought, she's not my therapist. These are not my friends. These are my classmates. So I just went in and I finally, because they thought I was, really not taking this class seriously because I hadn't opened up about my trauma. At that time, I hadn't yet experienced trauma. I did the year after. And when I experienced it, I remember thinking, oh, they would have loved me in my class. And I thought, well, that's sick. So I just made up a story. And suddenly she liked me and my grade went up. And it was just fascinating to watch that this can happen within the therapy world. And people are learning how to run things in this way. And I thought, okay, I have to do this. I just have to be this person who's the counterbalance to this as much as I can. So that's how I got started.
Since the space then wasn't what it is now, what was your first foray? How did you educate yourself?
Right. So I started going to conferences. And at the time, the organization that was connected to this was the Cult Awareness Network.
Right.
And it was started as this mom and pop organization around a kitchen table with parents who were just really concerned on a shoestring budget. And they were trying to eke out, being able to put conferences together. Scientology was very present at these conferences, getting in people's faces, heckling people who were coming forward, crying, telling their stories for the first time. I mean, they were really cruel.
Scientology is really cruel.
Very, very cruel. Yeah. Taking photos of the sign-in sheet so people didn't have privacy, writing down people's license plate numbers so they could, I don't know what on them. I don't know,
Right.
just for
Mess with them.
intimidation. Yeah, just to mess with them. And I've since actually, talked to people who were doing things like that, who now are on the right side of the fence. And we know some of those people,
Mhm.
but they were there at these conferences, really like terrorizing people on behalf of the world, on behalf of Scientology, not just because they felt like it. So I learned also just from hearing from people like Patricia Ryan, who's the daughter of Leo J. Ryan, who went to Guyana, to Jonestown, to try to rescue his constituents who were brought there to be part of the People's Temple, and he was shot on the tarmac when he arrived. She became someone who was speaking at these conferences, then was on the board of the Cult Awareness Network. In fact, when I started my podcast, I asked her to be my first guest ever to kick it off, because I think for a lot of people, Jonestown would help, it kind of help people be educated that this thing can happen. Mm-hmm. And so it really opened people's eyes, and her father's sacrifice was an incredible thing. And then reading some books, Robert J. Lifton books and others, meeting Steve Hassan, who I'd become friendly with in Boston because we realized we were both trying to do the same work. And then there was this place that got started, which was shut down by Scientology pressure after a while, and them picketing and threatening. But it was called the Cult Clinic. It was part of Jewish Family Service Counseling Center in LA, and they needed a clinician. And I'd just become licensed, and I said yes. And I learned as I went, and I learned also by reading, and I learned so much from my clients. That was also my first direct Scientology harassment, where they sent people in to pose as clients, and then I would get a full transcript of that session saying, and with a handwritten note at the top, just to let you know we're watching and listening.
Oh my God.
And I thought, I'm 22 years old. Like, this is freaking me the hell out. And they would have their discredited and fired LAPD officers that then they snatched up to use as their PIs and their goons. They'd be leaning on my car when I came out of the clinic and following me home. And I thought, what is this? Like, if I have to deal with this, and I wasn't ever even in it, and I don't have secrets, and they're not seeing me as a huge threat, I can only imagine what they're doing to the people they've really harmed who were really in it. And I remember staying home, being afraid for a while. They also threatened to take my counseling license away, complain to my board, which they've done numerous times, which has been such a pain. But still, I remain doing this.
Good for you.
I persevere. I stayed home for a week. I was nervous because they were outside my house. And then I just heard my dad's words. My dad had passed away about a year before, unfortunately. And I just heard him in my head say, "You can't let the bullies win." I thought, okay, I'm showing back up at work on Monday. That's how that started. And I worked in LA for quite some time, and then New York at the Cult Hotline and Clinic, which I think has since closed. And that's also when I started doing not only clinician work and continuing that, but running support groups for former cult members and for families and friends who want to know how to intervene, which I know we're going to be talking about today.
Perfect.
When you were witnessing all this stuff go on in classes and stuff, what do you think it was about you that didn't make you susceptible to wanting to participate?
So interesting, because what I noticed was for the first class, I thought, oh no, my things are kind of okay. I mean, I could kind of make up a story about some sort of trauma. Yes, I've had some losses of grandparents and losses of beloved pets and things, but I don't know if that is trauma per se. I think that's life, you know. Mm-hmm. But maybe I'm trying to think like how can I get a good grade here, and how can I be liked by the people here, because I'm being rejected. They're really kind of even tilting their chairs away from me because I'm not sharing, because I don't have enough to share. And I remember calling people from my past saying, what trauma have I been through? Like, oh, and I thought, wow, I'm feeling really anxious. And I suddenly caught myself because I remembered hearing about the social pressure to conform when you're involved in a group that's unhealthy. And the fact that the more you reveal about yourself, the more power you're giving to the person who now has your information. Like all the things that I had learned about manipulation and control, I realized were playing out and causing me initially anxiety when I didn't realize they were techniques. And I thought, what is going on here? And I suddenly remembered a chapter that I read in some book. I think it was Dr. Margaret Singer's book. And I thought, wow, I'm actually experiencing something from one of her books. I think this means that this kind of control and manipulation can happen anywhere, even in a safe space, or what should be a safe space, in a therapeutic space, in a college space, in a learning space. And I got mad. I got the how dare yous. How dare you do this, people? How dare you use this in this way? And what is wrong with you? And I shifted from feeling like I needed to be liked by those people. Because, everyone I think has this sense of not being invited to the cool lunch table, and they're thinking, how can they get there? It's part of human nature. It's part of carryover from teen years or preteen years. And you can have that feeling like, oh, I have to be invited to the cool lunch table. What do I need to do to get there? And what do I need to do that might be kind of contrary to how I usually operate or think to get there? And agree to say or agree to do to get there, to prove something about myself. I realized, wow, this is fascinating, that also this is the education that these master students are getting about how you run a group. And that really made me mad, because I realized it's dangerous, potentially dangerous out there.
Well, you really are the perfect person. And I didn't realize how early on you'd been in this space. Like if you were doing this with Cult Awareness Network, and for our listeners who don't know, that was actually taken over by Scientology. Correct?
Yeah.
And doesn't exist anymore. Don't look it up and don't call them.
Right, exactly. If you call the Cult Awareness Network now, you'll be talking to a Scientologist.
Oh my God.
So yeah, they sued the Cult Awareness Network. I think it was like 40 times over a 5-year period just for fraudulent suits, but still they had to defend themselves, and it ran them into the ground. And then they had to file bankruptcy. Then the name became public domain. They bought the name and became the Cult Awareness Network, or at least that's one of their fronts. And then I got involved in American Family Foundation, which was sort of the next organization after that, and then learned a lot also about how to bring people to the table, learned from Herbert Rosedale, who then went on to head the International Cultic Studies Association, about how to have dialogue with people rather than being at odds. And that was a great education for me about kind of how to get along with people and learn, and also how to help cultic groups learn about what they're doing if they're open to learning.
Do you mean cultic groups that are actually cultic groups and don't want to be seen as one? Like they're interested in evolving their public persona?
Right. So after AFF, and we switched over to ICSA, there was a man, still is a man, and named Anudama, who was one of the heads of Hare Krishna. And he came to a cult conference because he had suddenly heard about the abuse happening in Hare Krishna schools that he didn't know about, that was being hidden, and child neglect, just a lot of things, and the control and the manipulation and families being torn apart. He was so into teaching the teachings and loving the teachings and wanting to spread it around the world that he wasn't aware of the inherent dangers that had been woven in. And he actually would go to conferences to learn. And I thought, that's amazing. I don't know now how safe it is all across the board, but I think he was trying. He was one of the people in a large organization.
Well, that's good to know. Yeah. That gives me hope for the future.
Yeah.
This podcast wouldn't happen without our amazing, supportive, generous patrons. Are you with us? Come find us over on Patreon at patreon.com/alittlebitculty for bonus episodes, exclusive content, and the occasional Zoom with our fan favorites from our past episodes. It's a lot of fun over there, people.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
Break time's over, people. Let's get back to this episode of A Little Bit Culty. It's a good one. You have a very impressive resume and you've been doing the podcast for so long. I know that you work with people one-on-one and you're in a lot of documentaries, but you also help families a lot. What's your initial advice to families when they bring that problem to you, for lack of a better word?
Right. So with families, because I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, I've learned about family systems, which has been helpful in doing this work. And what happens within a system, it's very much like a mobile.
Mm.
You know, if you kind of pull down on one piece of a mobile, the other pieces move, right? And everything is affected by everything else. And the changes, the movement. And so when a family comes in, I'll actually start by asking them about their trajectory, how it's moved them, how it shifted them, how it's affected them, and really ask them how they're doing. And sometimes that's when the tears come because they've been holding it together to be able to rescue their loved one or defend their honor to family and friends who are blaming them for their child, let's say, getting involved in a cult. A lot of people can be very critical of families, of parents for that. And people feel the need to kind of posture in response and say something like, well, I know my child would never blah, blah, blah. And I raised my child. And so they've dealt with that, that kind of abandonment and being pushed out and judged by community, or just knowing that that might happen. And so they're living in silence with it and feeling isolated. So I try to tend to the family first. And I also want to see if they're aligned in what they want to do about this and how they feel about it, because it might be causing a lot of discord within the family, that sometimes one parent wants to do something and the other parent doesn't and thinks, just wait, they'll come out, they'll come to their senses, what I hear a lot. And so they're at odds with taking action versus not taking action, and it's creating some tension. So I try to do a little bit of family work before. Also, sometimes that's on purpose because when a family, if they're not actually being kind to each other, and I notice that's part of the culture of the family, but they want their child to come back into that, I think there's probably a reason.
Right.
So I'll let them know that if they really want their child back, I don't know if I can guarantee it, but they need to be able to provide their child with a place they want to come back to.
Right. Imagine if it's that kind of family, if there's toxic dynamics or a narcissistic parent or all these other things that may have been the impetus for the child leaving in the first place and finding their new chosen family, right?
Right. It's interesting. So I know this is a very nuanced thing, but something that I've noticed is that sometimes kids are raised in environments where there's competition. There's competition for being in favor with the parents. Okay. So there are times that when one sibling, and yes, I've dealt with where it's one of the parents who's gotten involved in a cult and all of the other permutations, but just by and large, mostly it's that parents are coming to me about their child.
Right.
It's not always, but mostly. So that's why I'm using that example here. Or it's a spouse letting me know about their spouse who they're concerned about. But again, going back to the parent-child thing, if there are other siblings, sometimes the siblings are very worried about their loved one and really want to help in getting them back. Sometimes they're really sick of having that child be the one who seems to be getting all the attention because the parents are constantly talking about that child and wanting to rescue that child, and family resources are going to that child. And they may have actually enjoyed having their stats raised in the family now as the good child who didn't get involved in a cult.
Right.
And I've seen some competitive family systems with siblings who will sabotage some of the rescue efforts. And when I notice that, I work then with the sibling. I ask to meet with them separately.
Oh, interesting.
So that we can address this. Again, it's the mobile, right?
I have a sibling. I'm one of 5. And
this is going to be Nippy's personal therapy session.
Yeah,
just for a minute.
I have one that's just still pissed at me for my involvement. And there's really nothing I can say or do that's going to change that. And it happens, and it's a human story. And, it doesn't mean I don't love her and she doesn't love me. It's just we're at this crossroads.
Exactly. Everyone is different. Everyone has different needs. And if she needed for you to be there for her, if she needed for you to be that big brother and you then abandoned her, not that that's what you were doing, but that's what it felt like.
Right.
Sure, she's going to have her reaction. There are also some siblings, some other kids who will get very mad on behalf of their parents because they see the hurt that other sibling caused the parents, or that they didn't go to visit that parent when their parent was in the hospital, and the rest of the family was there, but not the one in the cult. And they start to collect data on why they can be resentful and angry towards the person in the cult.
Well, it didn't help that I tried to enroll her. Every conversation was about like, well, I can help you with that. So, I get it.
No, that's okay. Right. I mean, that happens too. The recruitment. I mean, sure, you're supposed to like target your family.
Yeah.
I think that for some siblings, they have some unresolved stuff that they need to talk about, and they might not, because it's still, to whatever degree, this is not to be judgmental. This is just to understand it psychologically, which is always where I come out on things, that someone might still be benefiting from that anger, from putting that person down, from not having the softer feelings of loss and feeling like something was wrenched away from them. It's easier to have anger and resentment, actually. Because it's a stronger emotion. It doesn't make you feel as vulnerable.
Yeah, you're right.
And so sometimes people, they choose it, but it also shows they don't yet know or aren't open to learning about cults and control, and that this wasn't something that you were choosing to do just of your own volition. Without the cult group, you would not have done this in the same way. And people are not always open to learning.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
There was the puppet master that she's not seeing in the picture yet.
Right.
Well put.
I think that's something that we forget, is that we've done all this education and understand and forgiven ourselves and gone through the cycles. And then we look at somebody like that. And I have family members who are in the same boat, who are super judgy when I was in and super judgy when I'm out.
I'm judgy at me too.
Yeah, that's a soundbite I'm going to put in my pocket of like, they don't understand that I didn't choose this, and didn't knowingly. Like, if I'd known what the outcome would be, of course, I wouldn't have signed up for it. And they don't know all the dynamics. I'm just saying it again so it gets in my
there's no
head.
bad intent here.
Yeah. And this is, again, not to judge anyone. Everyone is reacting the way they're reacting for a lot of different, very, valid reasons. But there's also a coldness that happens with people involved in cults, and a lack of sensitivity about other people's feelings, which is going to feel horrible for others who are used to more warmth, but still they don't understand that you haven't changed. Your nature hasn't changed. You just have learned to be disconnected from those emotions and be disconnected from those emotions in other people. And so you can seem callous, you can seem cold, but you didn't change characterologically. And it would be great if she could see that in you.
Yeah, that would be great.
I do have to earn it a little bit. Yeah.
It might take time.
Yeah. Do you get people coming to you like they're in the cult of QAnon, or they're in the cult of, you get political stuff coming on right now? Is that are those a lot of your clients in that domain?
Yeah, I have that a lot in my therapy work, also in the support group that I do. That's every other week. There are a number of people there who are dealing with family members who have gotten involved in QAnon, who really believe in conspiracy theories across the board, and they've had a very hard time addressing them. Those are interesting. Those are tough cases.
Those are tricky.
They are. I've noticed over the last number of years, as people were getting, I think, more paranoid with the advent of, someone new at the helm of our country, and with the pandemic and et cetera, there were a lot of people who were saying, I've lost. That's sort of how they would start it out. Not my family got, or my family member got involved in something. They would say, I've lost my husband, my wife, my parent, my child to this. Like, they just are so cut off. But the feeling of loss also comes from not being able to talk about it. These were cases where the people were so fired up and so angry and so insulting that they could barely sit long enough just to have a session. They'd be up and pacing and getting, even on Zoom, getting in the face of the camera and pointing in my face and calling me names. And I thought, what is this? There was such vitriol and immaturity, but it was across the board. It was very interesting. It's a whole other way of relating to people. But I think I go back to this, I don't know where it originally came from, but it's something that it's like a saying that I use a lot in my work, that very often, not always, but very often, scary people are scared people. And so they've been made to feel scared.
Mm-hmm.
That unless they believe this, unless they go along with this thinking, they're going to be in danger. And unless you believe it too, you're going to be in danger. So they're yelling at you because they have to kind of drive home this point in their own mind in order to stay safe. And because they want you to take it on so that you stay safe. And why are you being so stupid and not, I mean, they'll use words like that, and not be open to the truth because you're just going to die unless you believe this. So there is this intensity that makes it very hard to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And what are the communication techniques you give to people who say they've lost somebody to any of these extreme beliefs, whether it's political, COVID, choose any of the topics du jour?
I mean, I think what's interesting is that there's a defensiveness where they have often been made fun of at their workplace. That's often why they need to connect with other people who are fellow believers. And so they're sure that you're going to make fun of them too. And when I let them know that my operating system doesn't include judgment when I'm doing my work. I mean, in my personal life, yeah, for sure. But in my work, no. And I just want to understand. I want to understand what speaks to them about this, why they feel they need this, what's happened in their past that's caused them to not trust the government, to not trust the media. And believe me, and we know, there are plenty of people not to trust and plenty of media outlets not to trust. So it's not like it's coming out of nowhere.
For sure.
But did something happen where they really felt like suddenly everything could change on a dime and they need to then have the answer so they stay safe? Are they also more prone to anxiety in general, so that having the ticket to the answer or safety is this thing that they've always been searching for so they can feel calm, or at least more calm inside? I try to understand their personality and I try to get it, but I try to also see what has that hold over them. And I've found, and I don't mean for this to seem biased, but a lot of people who are involved in conspiratorial thinking, I think, are more prone to anxiety, are more prone to what we call catastrophizing. Mm-hmm. And so they're assuming the worst, so they need to remain safe from the worst. And people who tend to be a little more settled, confident, calm, are not assuming the worst. And even if they think the worst might happen, they'll say, well, all right. They're so busy with their lives, just doing their life, that it doesn't have to be their focus in order to remain safe. And, we can lead into sort of how I just deal with families in general. But one of the things that I've noticed with this population is I've worked with a lot of kids who said, my parents have, let's say, gone to these, PTA meetings and are lashing out at people, are kind of diving over the dais and trying to grab the head of the school because they say they care about the children. Well, if they really cared about the children, maybe they shouldn't act like this at the PTA meeting where I can no longer show my face because my mom or dad attacked my friend's father at this meeting. And so I wish they would actually care about me a little more than they quote unquote care about the children. And so there is this not seeing what's right in front of you and the damage that you're causing and what you're doing to your life and your family system while you're busy worried about some things in the distance that may or may not ever happen.
I do tend to catastrophize, but I don't think I'm conspiratorial doing it.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I think it also comes from I'll go down some rabbit holes and I'll go, this just doesn't make sense anymore.
Right.
I just get to a point where I have enough context and enough history knowledge to go, that just doesn't make sense. The assumption, the premise, for whatever reason, just loses me. Also, our story is showed up. I'll give you an example. You know that guy David Icke is? Mm-hmm. David Icke is this huge, doomsday kind of guy. And something came up because we did a training on, what's his name?
Necker Island,
Richard Branson, that now Richard Branson's names come up on Epstein and all that. It's he was doing this with Allison Mack and the Necker Island thing.
Now we're linked to Epstein.
And now we're linked to that. And Allison Mack wasn't even on the island. And it was just so I have enough context to go, okay, that's how these people work.
Nothing would surprise me now.
But then there's also the case of I didn't know Keith was doing what he was doing, but I just don't think that was going on. Although, what credibility do I have at this point in terms of what Keith Raniere was capable of? I don't know. But that's not what I'm going to spend my time thinking about. For more background on what brought us here, check out Sarah's page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and at most bookstores. If you want to see that story in streaming form, watch both seasons of The Vow on HBO.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
You've heard from our sponsors. Now let's get back to a little bit culty, shall we?
Are you still doing a lot of interviews for docs and stuff right now?
Yeah, there was one of them that came out about the Twin Flames universe.
Right.
I was interviewed for the Netflix one, interviewed over a number of days. And then I had to, in a weird way, I had to back out of it. Actually, I talked to the producers because I was then getting referred by families so I could work with their children.
Mm-hmm.
And if I then was in the documentary, I wasn't going to be able to be seen as an objective source of help for their families. And now I have about 4 or 5 families I'm working with whose kids are in it, 2 who are thinking about leaving, and 3 actually who are still in it, even though they've been tremendously hurt by it. It's interesting. So I think that was my latest interview, but then it needed to get scrapped so I could still be kind of an objective therapist.
That seemed like there was some dueling documentaries similar to some of the drama like we had with Seduce and The Vow.
No, that does happen. I was very surprised when the Netflix thing had begun and we were filming. And then I was in touch with Cecilia Peck, who I had worked with her on Seduced. And she said, I'm doing a doc about Twin Flames universe. I thought, oh God, here it goes again. I had the same feeling like, okay, now we're going to have this neck and neck kind of thing. And I don't know, but I'm glad that there were 2 documentaries, and I'm still shocked by how few people still learn about cults and learn about these groups, even if there are 2 whole documentaries about them.
I know.
It's amazing,
in
right?
many ways, it's obviously tense for the survivors who are dealing with more what seems like betrayal and, whatever, the drama around who's doing what and who's being interviewed, whatever. I don't like that for them, but it's great for the world because not everybody has Netflix and what was it on Prime? It was on Prime, right? The other one?
Prime.
So not everyone has both.
Yeah, exactly. Great for the world. What's been interesting, though, is with the people I'm talking to who are still in it, they said that the membership numbers and the people coming to their websites and people getting involved actually has increased.
Interesting.
Because people learned about the name of the organization and went to check it out and got kind of sucked into the promises of it, which is really interesting.
That's mind-boggling. I guess I didn't watch the whole thing. Or they were really looking for love.
That was afterwards talking to people like, has it really impacted your group? Because they hated that the documentaries were out there. And they said, no, actually, our numbers have gone up. That's very sad.
I have never wanted a Jeff and Shalula to, that's what I call her, to get arrested more than any other current.
They're despicable people.
Really.
Well, their karma's coming. That's one of the things that I've learned.
Yeah, karma's a real thing. Or whatever you want to call it, cause and effect, karma, you can't go around doing that forever.
Right. Yeah. Being an asshole.
Yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
Back on track.
Yeah.
I guess if we're going to give here's the cheat sheet. What are the main do's and the main don'ts after you've analyzed the family system and given people some own therapy within the group. And then now they're going to deal with this family member. There's some really solid do's and don'ts that you ascribe to.
Yeah. So over the years of, I guess 32 years now of doing this work, I've learned so much from families. What has worked better than other things? What has really not worked at all? What's really sabotaged their efforts? And what I've noticed is that if a family comes out in a very judgmental way, like you are involved in a cult, they use the C word right away, and you need to get out of this. And the leader is all these terrible things and judging the person, like, how could you be so blind? how could you be so stupid? How could you be so gullible? All of that needs to be shelved, actually burned, just like
Don't do that.
away forever. And instead, I will guide families to do something that might feel a little more slow going and a little more subtle than they are wanting at first, because, they're wanting to go in and rescue, and they're hoping that if they just say the most perfect or magical thing in a conversation, it will kind of turn a light back on in their loved one. And that's often not necessarily how it goes down. And so I try to have the family first, we try to have them work on them if there's some things to work on, so that if they're going to be giving or wanting to give their loved one kind of a safe place to land when they come out, it really does need to feel safe. It needs to feel healthy enough for a person to want to be there. But I think for families, I'll guide them to have a conversation that feels relaxed, that is calm, that is slow, and to be ready to end the conversation at any time if it gets tense, that they don't have to throw it all into one conversation and overwhelm their loved one with all these facts and figures about what they're involved in. It is true that families often know more about the group than people in it, because they're able to access information in a way that people in it can't. So they know that. And so they want to unload all of this on their loved one to educate them. But that is overwhelming to do in a great way, in a huge way at first. So I encourage families instead to come from a place of curiosity, so that they are the student, not the teacher at first. Tell us what you like about this. Tell us what works for you here. What was the draw? Educate us about what you're learning. Because I think if you come across like, here, your loved one is smart and they got involved for some reason, it could have been that they were lied to and they believed that this is what they were going to be getting, but still that was the draw. And it could be that along the way, they have learned some things that have been, valid, and they want to be able to share that. Because then I think, as with anyone, if you feel you're respected, if you feel like your mind is respected, that there's a reason that you got involved, there's a reason that you're staying involved, you're going to be way more open to hearing why it's also not safe, why it's not a good idea. But if you feel you're being criticized from the start, you're already shut down. If you want to tell someone that you think that they've gotten involved in something that turns out to not be what it was promised, first find out what they are getting from it, learn from them first, so they can feel good and they can feel like they are kind of on top within the conversation, again, as the teacher, your teacher. And then what you want to be able to do with them is to what I call talking about talking. So I will have families say, listen, thank you for sharing what you like about it and what's good about it. And I hope also that you can feel comfortable sharing with us what you don't like about it, which might be harder to talk about. And let's figure out how to talk about talking about it. What are the rules of engagement? Do you not want us to say anything? If, let's say, you do feel courageous enough or safe enough to say, actually, I am being mistreated in these ways. While I'm learning X, Y, and Z, I am also feeling like something is really wrong here. Do you want us to just be quiet and be listening? Do you want us to make sure we don't say, I told you so? Do you want us not to pile on with, and that's one of the things that we heard about, and there are these 12 other things. Do you just want us to be quiet so that you can fill the space with your words, with your openness, and just tell us how you want us to respond to you? And let us know also when you're done talking, when it feels like it's overwhelming and you want to hit pause and pick this up another time, and we will follow your lead. It's something also that can be very healing for family members involved in cults, because that's not the way they're being treated in the cult. Usually they're being pushed to share more, to reveal more, to get tense in conversations. And so it's sometimes, from talking to some former members, they said it was really nice to have a family member say, you get to decide, you get to be in charge of this conversation and share as much as you want, and then end it when you want. And they realized that that was never happening, either in their controlling relationship that the parents were trying to rescue them from, or within their cultic group. What's also true is that parents sometimes have already been hurt by their loved one, or the loved one. I don't mean to always say parent again, but I'm using sort of the majority of the cases here.
The not cult member person.
Right. It's just that's longer, but that is exactly what I mean. So thank you. And I want people to hear that when I say parent, that parents have been hurt. And I don't want them to use that conversation to talk about how they've been hurt or how they were so upset that their family member didn't come to Thanksgiving. This conversation is not about them.
Right.
This conversation is about just listening and showing that they can be a safe place and a safe person to talk to. I think also it guide parents to notice if their child is using cult speak, because very often they have started using cult speak, but they've also been at times kind of trained to have these conversations and to know what to say and to have the lines ready,
Right.
And so I will sometimes ask parents to say the following: you know what? I don't know if I fully understand that language. And I really want to understand what you're saying because it's important. So can you put it in your own words? That would help me out here so that I could really get the importance of your words. I just am not understanding it as you're saying it so far. So can you give us another shot? What you're doing there?
Planting a seed too.
Right, exactly. That they are speaking like other people in the cult, but they're not really opening up. They're not really connecting. And when you help someone get into their previous way of talking in their previous language, you help them get back into their pre-cult self. And it helps them be reminded of how they used to sound and how they used to say things. And they start to hear all the changes in them, in themselves. It also evokes feeling when you're talking from your heart, and you can be way more connected to what you're saying too, and feel way more connected to your family member who you're talking to. I think it's also important to use forever messages. And I talk to families about forever messages, that if they can tell that their loved one is still not feeling like they want to leave, not feeling like they feel comfortable even having this conversation continue, to use the last minute, if you can, to offer forever messages. I will be here, or we will be here. You will always have a home. You will always have a place to come where questions won't be asked, where you can, again, safely land and be able to rest, be able to feel safe. And you can call us at any time or just show up at any time. There are people who stay involved in their cultic system or their cultic relationship because they don't know that. They don't know that they can come back home. They feel like they've burned their bridges, or they've pissed off or hurt their family members or whomever else. And so they will, and I've heard this from so many people, and that's why I weave this into guidance, to guidance with families, where people said, I stayed for longer because I just didn't know I had a place to go back to. Some families are not able to provide that, and they're not willing to provide it. But I will offer it to a parent or to a loved one if they're able, and to remember to say it. And a lot of families will say, but that's obvious. And I'll say, no, it's actually not.
I was just thinking about what you said about the manipulation thing, like, well, you didn't do this, or like sharing their own hurt. At least for NXIVM, if I brought that to the leadership, they would say, do you see how manipulative your parent is or your family member is? Like, that's not healthy. Like, they're not supportive of you. And then I'd feel better about being a NXIVM. So that's such a good reminder that it's not what that conversation is for.
We're extremely fortunate to have families to lean on at the end of this.
They kept us,
we
safe places.
We wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for the help for both of our families, both in a financial aspect and empathetic aspect. So we were both really, really lucky. And I think it's kind of why we weren't all in terms of.
We never burned those bridges completely.
I never put ESP and XM in the way of my family, and neither did Sarah.
Right.
Maybe there was a couple events we missed that we didn't want to. But
I definitely have some regrets of things I missed.
It was never, I'm not going to go this because this event at NXIVM is more important. And I think that's one of the things that was a decision I made early on. And because I saw a lot of other people doing that.
Right.
I guess we just had a boundary. But
that's very powerful.
Yeah, it was fortunate that we had that to lean on.
Very, very fortunate. I think also controlling partners and cult leaders are masters at rewriting people's histories.
Right. Oh, so true.
So if you are supposed to disclose a ton about your life and about your past, it will be, see, your parent didn't love you. That's why they let that happen to you, or that's why you got injured, or that's, that means this and that means that. But it's usually just to help you detach from your loved one. And everything is symbolic of how they just never quite cared to the same degree that your new controller cares. And they never understood you, and they never accepted you the way we do here. So that's why that message of you have a place to come home to and we will love you forever and the door is always open for families. Yeah, it's not at all still obvious, because often the opposite has been drilled into people. So you actually need to remind them of the truth of that.
So much empathy required.
We have a friend who has, I'm not going to name any of their names, and I don't really want anyone to be able to figure out who it is, but they have a daughter who's in a precarious situation. You might call it the cult of one. And it's been quite a while, and they're very remote, and they're not really close to anything in society. They're separated from them and isolated. And I asked the father, because it's been a while now, and he's basically recognized that she's in not a very good situation, and she's not open. And this might not even be an appropriate question for you, but I felt like if my child was in that, there'd be a point where I would just hire someone to go get them and remove him from the situation. My question to him was like, when do you use aggression? When do you use, how do you make the distinction of when it's all right, this is my daughter's life. It could end. How do you know that point? And when do you use violence, I guess, as a solution or ever.
I know they used to.
The old they'll wake up thing kind of looks like it might not work. What I know I would freak out. I know I would be like, I'm going to the guy's door and I'm going to bring some
militia,
some friends and handle it if it just didn't seem like there was any sort of progress in it. And I don't know if you've been in that situation at all or.
So, right. Yeah. It used to be that the way that people got rescued was, with the van and pulling people in and rescuing them, taking them away, which is often traumatizing and also illegal. And as a parent myself, there are ways that I have to instruct people to do things that are way different than what my fantasy would be if that were my child. So I get it. But I think what is good is to try to get eyes on their child, to see if there is a PI, if somebody can find out if there is an issue around safety that is taking place, because that's actually when you can get the law involved. That's when there are raids on compounds, when there's a huge amount of abuse, medical neglect, malnourishment, whatever else. If there are things happening that are putting that person in harm's way, then you can get people to come and help you with a rescue. What is difficult is that emotional abuse is not something that the law really knows how to respond to because it's invisible, right? But if there's a way to find out, even to try to do some form of surveillance, that's a legal surveillance, to try to see if this person who they love is in danger. When your loved one is in danger, that is when you can call the powers that be to help you.
That's a good point.
And bring some of their muscle in, but you need to find out. And so there is a PI I often work with who I like, who understands also about the nuanced difference of dealing with cult cases, because there are also some PIs who will just want to come in and like gangbusters. And that's not a good idea.
Well, it's also dangerous.
Yeah. And it's not allowed.
Is that a resource that you share? And that was actually one of my questions for later, but is he a resource that's on your website, or do you have other resources?
He's not on my website. People can definitely check him out. His name is James Elliott. I like him a lot. 2 L's, 2 T's. He does a lot of missing persons work, and he also has done a lot of cult cases. He's really wonderful. He's also really honest, and will tell a family from the beginning, I don't actually think that I can help you in this situation. So don't wait. I don't want to waste your time and waste your hope.
That's great.
I think it's good though for a family to know too that they'll be able to have a better sense if their child is in danger if they keep communication going, which is going to mean sometimes doing some acting and kind of pretending you're fine with what's happening, so that your child will talk to you, or your child might come back, even if your child says, I'm only going to come if the person I'm with comes with me, because they're usually not let out of that person's sight.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes a family, I'll encourage them to say, okay, that's fine. You can bring that person with you, because it still is going to give you an opportunity to have some eyes on your loved one, some closeness, and renew a sense for them about who you are, and undercut the messages that they've been given about you, which are often the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to be able to see that they still love you and they miss you and they can trust you.
And if someone's listening to this and wants to, I mean, I know people reach out to us all the time, and we're not therapists. So I have you on my website and the other people in our space. But is there a specific resource or support networks you recommend when people are trying to help a loved one exit a cult, other than working with you directly as a starting point?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, there is the support group that I run, where there are former members and also a lot of families who get involved, who want to be able to talk about what the situation is that they're dealing with, again, because they're dealing with a lot of isolation over it.
Mm-hmm.
And they like being able to connect with other families. They also like being able to talk to the former members who are part of the group to say what would have worked and what wouldn't have worked, like help guide me as the person who's been through this experience. So they kind of guide each other and help each other. And some have even kind of lost their families because they left their families when they left the cult, because their families were a part of it. And they've kind of connected with some of the other parents in it as sort of surrogate parents, which has been quite lovely. It's also good to connect with the International Cultic Studies Association, because there is a lot of material they have on their website. There are some free PDFs that I have on my website, so you don't even have to make an appointment. You can just download information from my website that might help guide you. And going to conferences or attending them online, there are going to be particular workshops and presentations that are for families specifically. And so I encourage people to attend those or to download them from the website.
Okay. Amazing. You have so many resources, and you in and of yourself are such a resource. And we're so...
No, I love the process.
Yeah. We're so lucky.
Start to finish.
So lucky to have you here. And as you know, I've referred a lot of people to you and to have total trust in you and your expertise over the years. I didn't realize how far back it went. So dare I say the goat, one of the goats. Took me a while to realize it was not an animal, by the way, but I'm cool now. Well, hopefully people don't have to hire you, and they can, listen to the podcast, see the red flags, not join, or, but if it's too late, I've got your number.
Right. Yeah. And that's part of the reason. It's interesting you mentioned it. That's part of the reason that I started the podcast, not only just because I find it interesting and people find it interesting, but I also see this as a human rights issue.
Yep.
And I
That's exactly
want
what it is. Yep.
people, right? I want people to not be sitting ducks. I want them to know what to watch out for, and that those things exist, not just in a religious organization or in a self-help organization, but they can exist in your workplace or in your family system or in your relationship, in your marriage. And so here are the warning signs. Yep. Take them or leave them, but I'd rather give them to you so that you have some armor on as you move your way through the world.
Rachel, thank you so much for your time on our podcast. It's always a treat to learn from you and spend time with you. And thank you for doing this work. It's so important.
It's my pleasure. It's always my pleasure to talk to you, to both of you. And I love what you have put together, and that you are together, that you have each other through this. It's an amazing thing to know you have a partner on this journey. And I know you've both been through the ringer, and you've come out so much stronger and with so much wisdom. And thank you so much for sharing it.
Thank you.
Thank you
for your support and being one of the people there.
You like what you hear? Please do give us a rating, a review, and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen. Every little bit helps us get this cult awareness content out there. Smash that subscribe button. You know what to do. So, Nip, what really stuck out for you?
It's always good to have someone who hasn't been through a cult per se, but has educated themselves on what they're looking at when talking to people who have been through it, right? Because one of the things that we ran into when we got out is these people don't understand cults. They understand therapy, but they don't understand that there's a specific niche. And so she's done that and done that well.
We love her. We love her podcast and hoping to get her over on the Zoom for a Q&A with our Patreon members. Join us there and stay tuned next week for another episode of
ALBC.
Till next time.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We're heading over to patreon.com/a-little-bit-culty now to discuss this episode. In the meantime, dear listener, please remember, this podcast is solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. It's not intended as a substitute for real medical, legal, or therapeutic advice. For cult recovery resources and to learn more about seeking safely in this culty world, check out a-little-bit-culty.com/culty resources and don't miss Sarah's TED Talk called How Cult Literate Are You? Great stuff.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production, executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound and our co-creator and show chaplain/bodyguard, Jess Temple Tardy. Our show writer is Holly Zadra, and our theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant.